Hello, and welcome to this webinar on getting started with InterBase for RAD developers. My name is Mary Kelly, and I am a software consultant here at Embarcadero for the RAD Studio and InterBase products. You can reach me at mary.kelly@embarcadero.com if you have any questions. On the agenda today, we will cover an introduction to InterBase and the versions. We will look at how to choose an embeddable database, where InterBase fits in to take advantage of this database in your RAD Studio applications, and what you need to get started with using InterBase before jumping into some demos and sample applications that you can test and use to better understand how InterBase and some of the features could work for you. Lastly, join me for a Q&A where I can answer your questions on using InterBase within your Delphi or C++ Builder applications. InterBase is a small yet powerful embeddable database or bundled server where you can truly embed, deploy, and relax. The overall footprint is small compared to other servers. We have a simple installation and deployment process. You can just embed it inside your installer and silently install InterBase without anyone ever knowing. InterBase is used in a lot of distributed applications, being able to just deploy it and leave it alone without having to have a full-time DBA to monitor and manage it, which makes it a very cost-effective solution for ISVs. As a database software, IB provides a fast, powerful, and reliable database engine capable of scaling users for any industry or business size. Fully customizable to your specific needs, IB is the database that keeps on running. InterBase provides 256-bit encryption, which matches the federal regulations on personally identifiable information, and several other ways to keep users' data safe, providing database and column-level encryption with security and user roles to keep access to your data private, letting you focus on getting your secure application ready for market. InterBase has been finely tuned to perform with the Embarcadero developer toolset, Delphi and C++ Builder, and you can also use InterBase with a variety of languages like Visual C++ and C, and of course you have the standard interfaces like ODBC, JDBC, and ADO.NET. InterBase is also designed to be low maintenance or self-tuning, making it great for embedded applications or areas with a small IT support team. With a multi-version architecture and multi-core SMP support, as a developer, you can take advantage of today's multi-core architectures and scale applications transparently across multiple CPUs. We have a couple different editions of InterBase. They include InterBase Server, Desktop, To Go, and IB Lite. We also have a developer edition of InterBase that is included with your RAD Studio license. If you have multiple users and devices that need to connect to the same data, then InterBase Server is the best choice for your architecture. InterBase Server runs on both Windows and Linux, giving you the flexibility of connecting many different types of devices to the same database. InterBase easily scales up to hundreds or even thousands of concurrent connections, and since it runs as well on a laptop as it does on a commercial-grade server, it's a very flexible solution to accommodate your customer demands and their resources. The desktop edition has the same idea as an InterBase server, except that it's permitted only to local database connections. As your customer base grows, you can easily scale from a desktop license to a server solution. Now, InterBase To Go is an option for anyone wanting to add data storage to their applications, either locally or by connecting to a remote InterBase server. InterBase To Go is an excellent choice for iOS, Android, Windows, Linux, and macOS applications that need to move data storage offline to enable offline capabilities or to have added security for data at rest. With InterBase to Go, you can have standalone encrypted data storage and remove the need to install client drivers. Now, IB Lite is similar to IB to Go, as both contain the same libraries for the embeddable database engine, but it has a few restrictions, such as a database file size limit of 100 megabytes. It also does not have any form of encryption, either DES or AES capabilities. Data access and management requirements of embedded database applications are different from what traditional database servers support. These applications must be able to run on devices that range from smartphones to desktop devices to the Internet of Things. The typical database server has mechanisms like indexing and querying that must be available separate from these monolithic software applications as embeddable components. So when you're looking at options available for embeddable databases, there are a few things to look for. What client platforms are supported? Are you looking to support Windows and Mac OS desktop and laptops only? Or do you need to go beyond Windows and Mac into iOS and Android, perhaps Linux? Are you looking to support platforms that aren't traditionally considered mobile, such as embedded systems, perhaps IoT devices and wearables down the road? Many of today's applications start on mobile, then add a native desktop or web companion application. It's important to evaluate database and cloud options based on the platform support that you need not only today, but also in the future. When you set out to build mobile applications, you may have an idea of the range in numbers of users that will need to access it. But in the event you don't, as it goes live to the app or Play Store, for instance, you may find yourself dealing with the scaling of users and slower performance as the application base grows. There is still a limit on the disk size of mobile devices. Being able to manage complex data in a smaller footprint is a necessity for any application. If you store data on mobile or desktop machines that connect to a centralized server, then being able to synchronize or replicate the data from both the servers and the clients should be a top priority. When you're using synchronized and decentralized storage, it is important to access, transmit, and store data securely. To cover this completely, you need to address authentication, data at rest, data in motion, and read-write access. Authentication should be flexible and allow for the use of standard public and custom authentication providers. Support for anonymous access is also important for many applications. For data at rest on the server and the client, you'll want support for both file system encryption and data level encryption. For data in motion, communication should be over a secure channel like SSL or TLS. For data read-write access, the database should offer granular control over what data can be accessed and modified by the users. And a database that requires routine maintenance is not an option for a variety of embedded database deployments. Database maintenance also adds to the overall cost and increases development time. Now let's take a look and see where InterBase fits in the embeddable space and see just how you can take advantage of those features in your RAD Studio applications. Whether you're deploying an application or providing a device with an embedded database, you don't want the end user to even be aware that a database is being installed or run. InterBase provides a silent installation, so end users of the embedded applications will never even be aware of or have to care about the database. InterBase databases have great, easy-to-use features already built in, taking away the hard part of configuring and deploying your RAD Studio applications with a database in it. InterBase to Go shares the same support as your Delphi targeted platforms. You have Windows 32 and 64, Mac 32 and 64, Linux, Android 32 and 64, iOS 64-bit. If you can deploy your Delphi application to the platform you want, then InterBase can go with it. InterBase is a fast, native database with performance and scalability for multiple users and CPU cores. InterBase provides security and encryption for enhanced data protection, and memory and disk space requirements are kept minimal. Memory and disk space for embedded databases is important because they impact the end user's configurations. So a database with a small footprint not only minimizes those system requirements, but makes it easier and less time-consuming to install, which is essentially important if the application is delivered via the App Store or the Play Store. 2 points I really wanted to go into more depth on are change views and our security and encryption capabilities. Change views are a subscription-based model used to subscribe to some data and identify what data has changed in the database. So you create a subscription that covers different tables and columns and allows users the rights to subscribe to changes in that data. From the security perspective, there's no log tables or anything, so it's a very clean setup that tracks internally, so you don't have to worry about external files that everyone has access to or something that someone could scan to find out information relating to changes or updates to your database. So only the people who are subscribed to those data changes can actually see the changes made available to or for them. Subscriptions can run both during a connection and spanning a connection. So during a connection, you can get an alert and then just fetch the deltas. So if you were to fetch a few thousand records and then get a message that says there have been changes made to this table, you can use change views to get the delta instead of having to refresh the whole query again. Now this reduces the time and data movement over your network. For spanning a connection, a really amazing thing is that you don't actually have to be connected for it to record the changes. Once you start a database transaction, you can have a subscription set, then disconnect from your database, and then start a new connection with a new transaction at a future point in time. So for mobile devices, this is huge, as we don't always have our smartphones connected to the internet. Now, in today's world, we are pretty much always connected, but with our carriers charging us more and more for less data packages, sometimes we don't really want to think about downloading a few thousand or even a few million records over our mobile phone plans and thinking, how much is this one going to cost me? And each subscriber can have multiple devices, so you can run a single user connected to the database, and then everyone has this unique identifier for their subscribers, or each subscriber could have an ID for their phones, their laptops, and more. In general, security for InterBase relies on a central security database for each server host. This database, admin.ib by default, contains a record for each legitimate user who has permission to connect to databases and InterBase services on that host server. Each record includes the user login and the associated encrypted password. The entries in this security database apply to all databases on that server. Now, the idea behind user security is controlling who gets to see what data and what purpose they have for seeing that data. It's important to understand who should have access to the data, and what InterBase provides with role-based users is that you're putting the roles or these groups into your data layer. So you're adding some safeguards for abuse of privileges by users. A common issue around data security is to think encrypting the database is enough. The more important question is controlling who can see what data. Encryption in InterBase introduces a special user known as sysdso. Now, the SysDSO is the System Data Security Owner, and that user owns the responsibilities for most encryption-related activities. There is, by design, a separation of power between the database owner and the SysDSO, which is designed to help facilitate secure practices. The SysDSO cannot encrypt databases or columns, nor can they grant or revoke access to the encrypted data. Requiring that multiple users set up and implement encryption rather than just one person holding all the power adds in an additional layer for database security. For database level encryption, InterBase encrypts all the database pages that have user information. With column level encryption, you can have far more flexibility and be more specific. When you encrypt a column, you specify the table that contains the column. Now you can choose to either encrypt all the columns in that table or only the columns that you want. InterBase supports both strong and weak encryption standards. AES is fast in both software and hardware and is relatively easy to implement and requires little memory. Over-the-wire encryption encrypts the data as well as any other communications between the server and the clients. This is important if there are concerns about unauthorized parties or systems seeing this communication. InterBase security can either be embedded inside the database or you can use the admin.ib file. By using admin.ib, it can run across multiple databases, and if you want this security to be specific to one database, then you can use the embeddable version of InterBase, where the security table is actually inside of the database, and this is our EUA, or embedded user authentication. Now that we've seen what InterBase is, we understand what versions of InterBase do, let's go over the list of things that you need to start using InterBase today. First, you'll need access to your Delphi, C++ Builder, or RAD Studio software. Depending on your data access components and whether or not you want to use encryption, that will determine what version of RAD is best for you. IB Lite ships with the Professional Edition, while Enterprise and Architect both have the IB2Go mobile deployment license activation ability. RAD Studio has support for several data access frameworks, such as FireDAC, UniDAC, and IBX. Now, these are three of the most commonly seen with our Delphi and C++ Builder users. With the Enterprise and Architect Edition, you have access to FireDAC, which is our built-in universal data access component. It tends to be the preferred component library for even those not using InterBase, as it has drivers for many of the common servers out there, such as Microsoft, Oracle, DB2, and many more. InterBase Express Components, or IBX, is a set of custom data-aware components and controls that allow you to connect and access data from InterBase servers and databases. Now, applications that are built using IBX components give you more control over the specific features of the server and embedded versions. You will need your IB Lite and or IB2Go licenses that ship with your RAD software, and access to the sample applications that we also ship with RAD Studio. When you work with the InterBase server, you need to make sure that the instance you are connecting to is running. So we can open up our IB Server Manager, and we currently have the status set to stopped. If we start that, then our server refreshes, and with the green dot we can see that our server is now running. We can log into our server, and when you first install InterBase, the default username and password are the sysdba as well as master key, all lowercase. So we'll log into our server. Now, the database that we're going to be working with is the column_employee database. Now, this is a copy of the employee database that is included with Delphi and InterBase. We can log into the database with the master key password and take a quick look at the tables and the employee data. Now that we're logged in, we want to encrypt our data within this database. So not only are we going to encrypt the entire database, but we're also going to choose to encrypt a specific column within the employee table. Now for the application that we're going to be working with, it's going to be an HR versus new employee application. So our HR personnel will be able to see the salaries, so they'll have permission to see the salary, while our new employees will not. Exiting out of that, we can then go back up to our column employee and choose to encrypt the database. Now the first step with the encryption wizard is to provide the password for our sysdso user and create a key. I'm going to say and create a key. I'll say key underscore new. And then we also have to choose the cipher at which we want to work with. We have both AES and DES. We'll say we want AES 256-bit encryption set to random for both init vector and padding. We'll click next, and then we'll create the backup key for this, and we'll just say backup underscore key and provide a password. Clicking OK. Our database is now encrypted. So now I want to go into my employee table, and I want to click on Alter and choose the salary field. Then I'm going to edit that salary field. Now the encryption key that I'm going to use here is just the HR key, and I can choose to have a decrypt default, for instance 0 if I wanted. And now my salary field is encrypted. And since my salary field is now encrypted with the HR key, I can then go to permissions. Now, any of my users specifically that'll be here, I can then go through and create a new item. So I will give encryption permission to this specific user. So I'll say my HR employee, they have decrypt properties with grant options for the salary column. So I can click OK. So now my HR employee has access to decrypt my database. So now I'm going to show you in RAD Studio how you can use the IB2Go Encrypt application to connect to an embedded InterBase database. Now this application uses embedded user security, or EUA, to manage access to private data. It has password protection and also has encrypted data on device. Now this prevents anyone from being able to read off the database file. The application has those two users, the HR employee and the new employee that we saw in IB Console. We can access the staff FireDAC connection editor to see what our connection looks like. We have the driver ID set to IB, the name and path of the database, the username and password, along with the protocol. We can do the exact same thing with the FD connection for HR. We have our database, the protocol, the username and password, along with IB driver set again. We can test that connection. And we have successfully established the connection to both of our databases. Now taking a look at the queries that we're going to be running, it'll be the same query for both, but it'll be the select full name and select salary. FireDAC drivers implement the IFD-Fizz driver interface that can link, configure, and create a FireDAC virtual driver to your selected database. To connect to a local database on mobile, you need to deploy the database to the mobile device and check the configuration to see where the local file is going to be. under the Documents folder for iOS devices or internal storage for Android devices. You're also going to need both the InterBase to go required files like the license file and the other configuration files, along with the database file. You can add the IB2Go license file to your project by right-clicking the project name in the project manager and selecting Add, then navigating to the redist location and clicking Open. We now have the reg_IB2Go license file included with our application. You can add the database file by clicking Add and navigating to the location of your database and clicking Open. After adding the database file, the Featured Files window displays. Now you'll select the InterBase to go in the Featured Files, then you'll click OK to close the Featured Files dialog box. Now under the InterBase to go node, you need to select the license that you wish to deploy on the device. In this case, we'll be choosing the IB2Go license, so we can uncheck the IB Lite. At the minimum, InterBase requires that the rest of the files are present before it can deploy to a mobile device or desktop device. These are messages, licensing, DLLs, the admin.ib file, and a few others. Now for embedded user authentication, you don't need the admin.ib file as the names and passwords are inside the database file. But if you don't choose to use EUA or embedded user authentication, then you must have a copy of your admin.ib file in the InterBase subdirectory. We can open up the deployment manager by selecting Project Deployments and selecting the debug configuration from the drop-down list of target platforms at the top of the deployment manager, and where we can see that the database has been added to the platforms. Now we can see how the remote path to our database has been set for Windows and for the Android platform. For the remote path on the Android device platform, it is currently set to Assets Internal. As we just configured, when we run the application on the mobile device, the database file is going to be deployed to the internal storage for the Android platform. Now we'll go ahead and build our application for the Android 64-bit platform. It will compile, link, deploy, and package everything that's needed before pushing out to my Pixel 4. We start off with the info page before moving into the connections, where we connect to both the HR and new employee databases. Now looking at the HR emp user, we can see that they have the decrypt privileges to decrypt the salary of the database. Looking at the employee user now, we can also see that our employee user does not have the decrypt privileges to see the salaries of our database. So now we're going to build this application in 32-bit Windows. We can connect to the users just to show you how there are no changes that needed to be made to the database file or to the application. And all of this was done using our embedded IB2Go license. I'm going to go ahead and show you this sample that I have of a ChangeView subscription on the medicines database. Now, this database is actually included with RAD Studio in the samples that we ship, so you can go ahead and check out some ChangeViews yourself later. You can find it in the DBMS specific InterBase folder under the FireDAC samples. Now, this database has 3 tables, and I have a few columns that house the categories and info for the medicines in the list, along with a link list that connects the dots between which medicines and categories go where. As you can see in the metadata, these are just normal tables that show the definitions behind our tables, where we have no triggers in place. To make this a change views explanation though, we have in the expanded tree panel for medicine.ib a view called subscriptions. And if I click on that view, then we can see that we already have a subscription created. So we're creating a subscription titled sub_medicines updates and setting that subscription on the categories medicine and medicine categories tables for inserts, deletes, and updates. So if there are any specific fields that I want to track, I can just add some brackets and state which fields I specifically want to manage. So this is really it for the syntax of creating a change view. So it's pretty simple. Of course, there's a lot more that can be done with a change view than just this, such as granting permissions. Now that the subscription has been created, I can grant permissions for the subscriptions to either specific users or a role, and then the said users can start with their subscriptions. So in our pharmacy database, I have the same tables, only I have a few more added in this one, and I'm going to subscribe to the data so I can see what data is changing across the order, customer, and pharmacy tables. You have these samples in your RAD Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder installation. So let's navigate through to the Delphi example that we're going to use today. So we're going to choose Object Pascal, Database, FireDAC, Samples, DBMS Specific, InterBase, and we're going to choose Change Views. Now the project we'll be working on today will be the pharmacy POC, so we'll open that up. I've gone ahead and opened two separate executables, one in debug mode and the other in release, so I can get things moving faster. I also have the central database admin tool, so I can alter the central data. First off, I'm going to fetch any deltas that may be available now, starting the session. I can see that there is a change available already. This one isn't important right now, so I will just update that. I have my local data in my P1 executable, and using the application, I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes to the central data, changing allergy to allergies, adding a value to a medicine name before fetching the deltas or changes so we can get that data updated and highlighted. Using show merged, that takes my local data into a FireDAC memory table, and using the delta merge option to merge those deltas. Now change views has field level granularity, allowing me to see what the changes are bolded and highlighted. Posting that data into pharmacy 2 here, I'm going to make another change to my data, specifically altering the value 2 to 3 and adding another value to another medication. Now looking at the pharmacy software again, I can just fetch the deltas and we now have the record showing the most recent changes only. I can then post that data into my database, making sure that everything's set up. Now, it's pretty cool to look at, but the underlying code is what really makes change views awesome. So the way this works is that you have two queries, one for the local data and one for the remote database. They both hold the exact same query, and really the only big difference is that we have this FD transaction delta. Now under the options for this transaction, I have it currently set to snapshot for my isolation mode, and currently it's set to rollback, but I could either choose commit or none. Since I don't need it to commit, I'll just keep it in rollback. Next, I can activate my subscription. Then running the same query, I would get back all of my deltas. So we set the local queries to be all cached updates. Since we're going to be applying all of our delta changes, we can then open the local queries before activating our transaction delta for our remote server. Then you would just set the subscription using the subscription name at whatever the device ID that we've chosen active. So now we're only reading the deltas, allowing us to go ahead and read only the deltas from our queries, and then using a merged data set, which actually just applies all of the change elements into our merged data set before posting those deltas in our local database. We can apply our delta merge, then finish off with applying those updates and committing the transaction. From this webinar, I hope you've seen just how easy it is to use InterBase, IB Lite, and IB2Go in your RAD desktop and mobile applications. Thanks for attending this webinar on getting started with InterBase for RAD Studio developers. If you have any questions or comments that we can't cover in our Q&A today, you can reach out to me at mary.kelly@embarcadero.com.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mary, for that informative webinar. We will do our best now to answer any questions anybody might have. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the question panel and we can discuss them. First question here is about slides. Where can people find the slides for your webinar, Mary Kelly?
Let me put the link into the GoToWebinar chat for everyone.
Fantastic.
All
I always
right.
want to call you your full name, Mary Kelly. I don't know. Does everybody do that, or is that just a me thing?
Well, that's actually everyone. Funny enough, though, my name is not only Mary Kelly, it's actually Mary Teresa is my first name. So I shortened it for everybody. But yes, you can call me Mary Kelly all you want.
Okay. So there's a question here about encryption as well, if it has support for SHA encryption, SHA.
Yeah, so currently we have SHA-1 encryption for InterBase.
Okay, fantastic. What about the GUI console applications for dealing with InterBase? I think you did show some of it in there, didn't you?
Yeah, so we ship InterBase with IB Console, which was the, as we said, the GUI for InterBase that we provide specifically. There are other GUIs available out there. Anything that more or less supports InterBase you can find. But yes, yeah, IB Console tends to be the most complete of GUI tools available.
Doesn't the Enterprise Edition come bundled with another tool for that from one of the IDERA partners?
Yeah, so it's the Architect Edition, and it is the Aquadata Studio product.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a great tool that you can utilize with InterBase. We finally have InterBase support for it, but you can also connect to over 35 different databases as well. So even if you can work with InterBase, you can work with Oracle, SQL Server, just about any other tool or excuse me, database that's out there you can use with Aquadata Studio as well.
Yeah, you know, I've used Embarcadero Studio, I've used IB Console, but I find so many times that because of the power of FireDAC, and I'm a huge FireDAC advocate junkie, I know, but I find that so often I'm just building the tool I need to do what I need to do in Delphi and FireDAC, and just be like, okay, that does what I need to do, I don't care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I will admit I do the same thing sometimes. For the most part, I try to use IB Console just because I'm an advocate for, obviously InterBase is such a great product, but that's what I do. I work with InterBase and all the products that are relating to it. But yeah, I find more often than not, I can get by with just using FireDAC, and I can utilize live bindings for things, and I can really kind of get a full understanding of everything relating to InterBase and how to work with InterBase using something as simple as live bindings and just FireDAC in general.
Yeah, exactly. You could just, if you want to just put like synedit down, and you have a nice SQL syntax highlighting and your query component and a connection component, put a couple fields down and a grid, and next thing you know, you've got a full database tool right
Yep.
there.
Yes.
So and the great thing is that I'm the kind of person that likes to automate a lot of stuff, and so then once I
Mhm.
have that set up, I can just automate, some process I need to take care of that for me, and then
Mhm.
it's there. So it's that I guess that's the great thing about being both the developer and the person that's messing with the database stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And again, the nice thing about InterBase is you don't have to go be an Oracle DBA. You don't have to go get certified to become a DBA to work with a database like InterBase. It is intuitive on its own because it was designed and built, as sort of the Delphi or C++ builders development database. So it really is kind of nice where you have this sort of drag and drop mentality. Sometimes we're like, oh, I wish I had this or I wish I had that. And it really does make it easier to use InterBase as a database when you're working with RAD Studio.
hmm I cut my teeth with InterBase. It was the first database I used, but I really did not have any idea what I was doing at that point.
Yeah.
And then later I learned Oracle, and wow, that was a lot. I mean, it's just a lot to understand to use Oracle. And
Hmm.
then I came back to using InterBase again, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is a whole lot easier to work with. And there was a lot of things that I learned you had to do in Oracle, and it's like, oh, I don't have to mess with that here. I mean, I think InterBase does a good job of it's kind of a good middle ground, if you will. It's got the power and flexibility of Oracle, but is more configurable and more like a database than something like SQLite. SQLite's great for like really simple use cases, but so often I start using SQLite and you get beyond what you can do with it really quick, and you're like, dang it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you have to start thinking about, okay, well, I have to add in third party tooling such as like encryption support or something like that, and
Yep.
and then it just becomes this whole big thing where instead of having one database, one SQLite sort of styled piece that has all these features built into it, you just start having to mess around with so much stuff, and as you're updating, you have to keep updating those tools as well as SQLite and making sure everything's sort of jiving together. Yeah, I'll say I started InterBase was the first database I ever worked with, same kind of boat as you,
Uh-huh.
and then I moved on to other databases as well. And moving back into InterBase, I was like, yeah, I like this tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ability to have a silent install or the embeddable deployment,
Hmm.
but then also have that compatibility where it's the same. You can still also treat it like a full database, right? Where you can connect to it
Yeah.
from multiple applications, and shared sessions and all that stuff. So it really fits that middle area of like 90% of what we're doing when we need databases. So
Hmm.
without
Yeah, and
compromises.
it's yeah, exactly, and it's the exact same database file. So there's no changes whatsoever. You could take the database file that had been sitting on, if you're deploying an application, you could actually take a copy, of the database that, maybe you have someone who's been sending in bug reports about something, relating to the data, and it's all on their mobile devices. You can have them actually submit the database, and you can open that database up in IB Console with the server, and you can actually diagnose from there as well. So as you're moving forward, with your databases, when you have, when customers come to you and say, "Hey, I have this problem," or here's the area that I'm working with, and here's the area that I'm having issues with, you can actually help to diagnose those issues that they may be having a lot faster as well.
Yeah, exactly. The change views though is a good example of how InterBase it has these like really high-end features, like the column level encryption. So I don't know if Oracle's finally added that, but back when I was doing Oracle, that was like the one thing that so often we got dinged for, because we had the software that was built on top of Oracle, and they our clients would need column level encryption. We're like, oh, that's not really an option. We can move that into another database or another table and encrypt that table, right? But we couldn't do column level encryption, and you know, so the fact that InterBase has the features like column level encryption, like change views, but then gives you this, embeddable, low footprint, low overhead type database. I'm a big fan. I know I sound like I'm just gushing and trying to sell it, but the reality is I do like it quite a bit.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm the same way. Anytime somebody asks me what I do, I'm like, I work on InterBase, and I get so happy and tell them all the cool features, and they're like, sometimes it goes over their head because I don't always talk to developers, but those who do understand, they're like, oh, that's actually kind of neat.
Yep. So Lewis is asking about ODBC, if you can connect to InterBase via ODBC.
Yes, you can connect to InterBase via ODBC. So we have ODBC and a JDBC driver as well, and even ADO.NET for those who do happen to use ADO. But yes, yeah, they have full connectivity.
I had to do something with JDBC again the other day. It was a bit painful. I guess maybe my job was just rusty, but
yeah, I'll admit I don't spend too much time on ADO or JDBC. I tend to stick specifically with ODBC, but that's just because of the applications that I tend to build. So,
well, it's interesting because ADO, ODBC, and JDBC, to a point, right, is that's this idea of having this level of abstraction
yeah,
that so you don't have to think about, in the application implementation layer, what database you're connecting to as much.
yeah, and that's also another thing too about FireDAC is, like you said, it's got that abstraction, but at the same time, we also have components that are more so specific to, for instance, working with change views, or very specific to working with some of the features that are built into Oracle or SQL Server or MySQL or any other database that's out there that we connect to. You kind of get the idea that it's like made for this, but at the same time, it's not.
Yeah,
So it's kind of that comforting feel of like, oh wow, I can use this product to connect to any database, but at the same time, it's like, wow, it's just like it was made for InterBase or something else.
That's true. That Jay just commented, Rusty FireDAC or Rusty Java is not a bad thing. That's true.
Yes.
Actually, FireDAC is another tool I could go on and on for hours about. But there are other tools and frameworks. There's the what are the InterBase specific components?
They're the IBX or InterBase Express components.
IBX and InterBase Express.
Yeah, they are. Funny enough, I believe actually the developer who more or less created IB Console is also one of the developers who more or less created the IBX component. So if you're looking for the tightest of integration between RAD and InterBase specifically, IBX is also not a bad tooling as well that you can use. But they work more or less like FireDAC, just solely made for InterBase and dealing with InterBase specific details to a little bit more fine tuning.
Occasionally people that I'm talking about, I go on talking about FireDAC, how great it is, how much I love it, and people are like, oh well, I'm using Unidac from it's too early in the morning for me. I can't think of
DevArt.
DevArt.
DevArt. I get their emails.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, sorry, I'm using this. I'm like, oh, that's fine. Use what works for you. I don't care. But
yeah, I say use whatever you want as long as it's not the BDE anymore. And that's just my personal opinion, because I work also in migrations of not only databases but also in applications, and moving from the BDE to or dealing with the BDE, I'm just like, I was not a developer when the BDE was around, I'll admit that. So I'm like, no, let's move you forward. Either choose, IBX, UniDAC, FireDAC, whichever one, but just not the BDE.
So I did use the BDE when it first came out, and I got to
Yeah.
say, BDE was easily 5 to 10 years ahead of its time.
Hmm.
Um, but it's things have evolved a lot since then, and the
Hmm.
BDE evolved for a while as well. So today the alternatives to BDE are much better.
Hmm.
Interesting thing about FireDAC, actually, when we first introduced FireDAC, I was talking with Kerry Jensen, which
Hmm.
if you're not familiar with Kerry Jensen, he's uh, phenomenal consultant and developer and trainer around databases and Delphi
Oh
development.
yeah.
And I'm like, hey, you should talk more about FireDAC and tell people about how FireDAC. And he's like, I'm not really familiar with FireDAC yet, so I don't really want to talk about much stuff I'm familiar with. I'm like, yeah, of course, absolutely. And then later on, he's like, oh my goodness, FireDAC is so cool. And he was doing a consulting with somebody, and they were using an old version of FireDAC. I think back before it was called FireDAC. Was it
AnyDAC.
AnyDAC? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
AnyDAC.
AnyDAC. Oh man, that's
And so they were using AnyDAC still, and he's like, well, let's try migrating it to FireDAC because it has some updates to it. And he
hmm.
said that they had these like little odd bugs and performance issues, and it fixed
Hmm.
everything. That was it. It was done. And he was like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad this all works now. But just and that's when he really started to realize that FireDAC is a great database framework. One of the things it has is in my mind, the BDE had a lot of flexibility and power, and there were a few replacements in between after the BDE started to fade. Some more lightweight ones was mainly the thing they were going is the BDE was a fairly heavyweight solution, started moving to these more lighter weight solutions, but
Hmm.
they didn't have all the flexibility. Either they were more tied to the database, or they're unidirectional instead of bidirectional, or some sort of compromise was made. And then FireDAC is like all the power and flexibility of the BDE, still super lightweight, no installation required. I mean, you have to have the database drivers, that's it.
Hmm.
And it just is phenomenal. So I'm a huge FireDAC fan. And if you're not using FireDAC yet, recommended, but don't feel bad if you just find something you like better. I'm
Hmm.
happy for you.
Yeah.
Is there a database management system for the free version of IB Lite?
So for IB Lite, we recommend using IB Console. And IB Console is essentially what you get with the developer edition, which yay actually already comes with your RAD Studio download. So when you install RAD Studio in the additional adoption or additional options page, the InterBase Developer Edition is basically IB Console. So you can use that as well to design your IB Lite or even IB to go applications.
Okay. Yeah. And actually, we're looking at a few other third-party database tool providers that we're trying to get to integrate more InterBase in as well.
Mhm.
Plus, like I said, whether it's InterBase or any other database, it's amazing how often I'm just dropping a few components on the form with
Mhm.
FireDAC to do things.
Yep.
uh,
Oh yeah.
Especially with the enterprise connectors.
Hmm. Oh yeah. I could go on for the next 6 hours if we talk about CDID's enterprise connectors.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then the thing I love, and then I'm be done talking about how amazing FireDAC is that you can drop down all these connections to all these different databases, whether it be
mhm.
a Google Sheet via enterprise connectors or Twitter or whatever,
Mhm.
local databases, local in-memory databases, data sets, whatever, and then use the local SQL and do like a join across all these and then like move data around. And it's just
Mhm.
like, there's so many things that years ago I spent so much time, so much writing, so much code to do all
Yeah.
these tasks for moving data around and stuff like that, that
Hmm.
it's just like click, click, click in FireDAC and you're done. And you're like, it's like, oh, I would have more
Yeah.
hair today if I'd started with FireDAC years ago, I tell you.
Yeah, yeah, I will say it is quite amazing. Because you don't even necessarily have to. The biggest benefit, in my opinion, on CData is you don't have to learn the specifics to the APIs that you're developing or trying to push data to. So being able to do that across one, sort of surface, if you will, or just one tool it's just a miracle, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I see you put the link in for the slides there. Fantastic, thank you for that. And thank you everybody for being on with us today, and for it's always great to hear from people and what you're doing and stuff like that, and good to see you, Jay. I know I've ran into a few times down in Texas, and everybody else that's online. If I didn't say your name specifically, I apologize. But great, thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you, Mary Kelly, for putting this together and all the work you put into InterBase.
Anytime. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always available.